Right, good afternoon, everybody. I know I'm very close to the graveyard session, so I'll do my best to keep you all awake. Mr. President, Vice President, and to Brent, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. Like a lot of you farmers, I'm a lot more comfortable in gumboots than I am standing on a stage in front of you all, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So what I'm going to do today in the talk is it's divided basically into two sections. The first section is the section that keeps me awake at night, and the second section is the section that wakes me up in the morning and puts the spring in my step to face the day. So I'm going to touch on our FMD, our own experience in one of our dairy farms up in Elliot. And then I'm going to share a bit of government, which I refer to as the unwritten invoices. And I know our MEC has taken a bit of a pounding here this morning, so I'll be light on you. And then some comment on organized agriculture. And then something that's very close to my heart is transformation through our student program. And I'd like to share some of the successes that we've had in our student program and then the reasons why we got involved in it. Alternatives to land ownership. Most of the land that I'm involved in on farming, I don't own, so I'd like to share how we've managed to do and in what entities we operate that land. And then share with you what's worked for us, and then a conclusion. Brett, which one? Yeah, this one. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to tell you in Elliot, now known as Koa, we have a dairy there where we milk about 1,600 cows. At 9:08 in the morning on the 2nd of February 2026, the dreaded message that changed everything, FMD. Now that hits you right slap bang amongst the eyes. The first 72 hours, cows started frothing at the mouth, blisters, mouth lesions on the fresh cows. Our calves started to die from tiger heart. Milk fever started in the fresh cows, and we knew we had a challenge on our hands. Then the storm hit. Calf mortalities started to escalate. We happened to be calving at the time. Milk production collapsed by 4 liters per cow within 72 hours. The long milking hours, managers and staff under extreme pressure, and these were the facts of FMD. The animal impact, 95% of our calves died. We stopped rearing calves because it became a senseless exercise. 68% of the herd got infected with mastitis. Now, a nightmare for any dairy farmer is mastitis. So you can imagine 68% of your cows with mastitis. 8% of the cows were limping, and we had 92 cows which had died, and cows which we sadly had to shoot because they just couldn't get up. The people impact, we were milking for extremely long hours, and very difficult to keep the morale up. So much so that we set up a temporary kitchen in the dairy to be able to feed the people that were milking cows. We brought in a whole lot of extra labor, but as you can well imagine, in the dairy operation, it's a semi-skilled job milking a cow and treating cows for mastitis, so we were very dependent on our management team. The financial impact, we lost 4.5 million rands worth of milk income, 1.3 million veterinary bill in a matter of a couple of months, and about 1.5 million would be the replacement cost of the 92 cows that had died. Now, the knock-on effect on that, as you can well imagine, it's one thing replacing a cow, but it's a knock-on effect in realizing that your whole calf crop has gone, and that's the genetics of the future in your herd. So this was the reality in a herd. Mountain View is the Elliott farm, milking 1,586 cows there. 68.3% of those cows got mastitis. Now, unfortunately for that herd, that was a herd that was unvaccinated. The second dairy that we had infected was just outside Queenstown called Gala Hills. There we milked 1,800 cows, and having got one shot of vaccine into them, we only had 5.5% of that herd that got infected with mastitis. So if anybody tells you vaccine doesn't work, give him my number. So the reality of FMD, the virus was the catalyst, not the real crisis. The true test was our ability to respond. If there is one lesson to learn from this, it's this. Resilience is not measured by how quickly we return to normal, but how boldly we improve the systems that protect our livestock, our business, and our food security. And I'm sure you'll all agree with that. And there, the ball is in our court. That's why we have congresses of this nature. So now I want to share with you, move on to the next subject, government, which I deem the unwritten invoices, and I'll explain to you why. It has become a norm for South African farmers to budget for costs that have either escalated out of control or costs that should not be borne by farmers. These are the unwritten invoices. Costs created not by farming, but by failures in the systems managed by government that should enable agriculture and not cripple it. And I think foot and mouth was a perfect example. Foot and mouth should never have happened. It's not the first time. We all know what the consequences are of foot and mouth, but it was allowed to get to the point where it caused so much damage. And we were very fortunate in the sense that we had one dairy infected. I know some friends in KZN who suffered severe losses on FMD. So think electricity, road maintenance, water quality, and previous speakers have touched on that, so we're not going to say too much about that. But there's a picture of our milk lorry coming to fetch our milk in the Tsitsikamma. Thankfully, I've got neighbors that have got big tractors, which I don't have, because I'm scared of machinery. But that's what we have on a daily basis. When we have any rain in the Tsitsikamma, the tractors line up, the one lorry arrives, we pull it in, we pull it out, and we wait for the feed truck to come, and we do the same through exercise again. Now, the only way that road got fixed was by us digging into our pockets and obviously fixing it, and obviously our neighbors who are very cooperative. So the access for trucks, the added increase, the repair bills, the longer turnaround time for trucks. Imagine trying to run a dairy fleet of trucks fetching milk when that's what happens on some of the farms that those guys have got to fetch milk on. And that comes at a cost. It's not free. Longer travel, turnaround time, suppliers refusing to service farms. We're getting to the point now where the service providers are saying, well, I can't afford to deliver to you as much as I'd like your business. It's not my fault. Huge costs to farmers to maintain their own roads. We're all experiencing that at this stage. Security is the next one. Security fencing, theft, cable theft on a pivot. You wake up one morning, pivot standing still, and it's got no cable left on it. Just for an example, Gala Hills, which I mentioned earlier, the Queenstown farm, our security bill on that farm is 180,000 Rand a month. A month, not a year, 180,000 Rand a month. In Elliott, the farm we had foot and mouth, is nearer 200,000 Rand. Both these farms are up against the commonage where we have absolutely no control of the security whatsoever. We even have guards in the daytime. That's why we have a bill of 180,000. Our insurance bills are getting to the point where people don't want to insure us. And these are the unwritten invoices. And the new category now, as far as that's concerned, is government failures have moved beyond expense control and into capital allocation. So every year when we sit down and we budget, we do our farming budget, and then we start to work out where we're going to go with our capital. And I've been fortunate enough we've been able to build a business by building new dairies. Literally every other year we were putting up new dairies and we were building new dairies. So a lot of our capital was allocated to growth. Our capital now, instead of growing farms, we're applying capital to survive. So gone are the growth days that we've enjoyed. We're now in a survival mode. And then when I say that, you've got to think generators, solar plants, water treatment plants. We've spoken about water. Have you seen the quality of water that comes down the river? Has anybody been to Hartbeespoort Dam lately? I was up there 2 weeks ago looking at the beautiful aloes and made a mistake by coming back over the Hartbeespoort Dam. It's an absolute disgrace. That's our water. So when it gets to us, we've got to purify that water now. That's not a cost that we used to have, and it's not a cost that we should have. Generators. I've farmed now for, give my age away here, but about 30, 40 years. A generator was something that you only bought once in your dairy career because you so seldom used it. We now have to replace our generators on a regular basis because they clock too many hours. That's a capital cost now. It's no longer a running cost to the business. So the question is, do government want to grow the economy of our country? So here's an example. I've just expanded a dairy where I built a new dairy on the farm, and I needed to upgrade the power from 25 kVA to 200 kVA. Now, you might not be able to see those numbers, but to do that, the bottom line was that it cost me 650,000 Rand to get my power to be increased from 25 kVA to 200 kVA. 460,000 Rand of that was a deposit. Now, we're fortunate enough that you can get a bank guarantee, but the bankers that are sitting around here, they're not silly. It comes off your facility. So now, my question to the authorities is if I had to put on a deposit of 460,000 Rand, which is based on 3 months' usage, I have a feed bill of R1 million a month on the same farm. Agri, who's a private company, if they asked me to put on 3 million Rand deposit before they serviced me, you know what I'll tell them? But this is Eskom. What can I tell them? I have no option. Well, I do. I do. So what are we doing? We're going to tell Eskom one of these days, take your transformer down, give me my 465,000 back, and I don't need you anymore because I can do solar. It's difficult on a dairy farm because we milk in the early hours of the morning and obviously in the afternoon. But on top of that, if you look at the other picture, that's the services that are rendered. So all the money that I'm paying would be okay if at least I could bank on the fact that I'm going to get a decent supply of electricity. That transformer, I may tell you, is outside our cheese factory in a public space. There are children walking past that on numerous occasions, and I've told the mayor of our district, how many times? This is a danger. It's been like that for years. Anyway, and then we get to the bureaucracy. It's been spoken about a lot. There they're all piled up. Water license. Have you tried to get one of those lately? Environmental approvals, land use permits, building approvals, animal movement permits. It's an absolute nightmare, and it's not surprising that the files have all piled up on the desk. But there you've got it, health and safety becoming a major problem. We had a health and safety officer who came to one of the farmers in the Alexandria area, and you all know the rotaries that we use for milking, told the person on the farm that the rotary was not allowed to move while they were milking cows because it was a danger to the people. Anyway, and just when we thought the government handbrake could not be pulled enough, along came FMD. And here was where we really learnt a tough lesson. So, don't know if you recognize the characters in the photographs. The one is yours truly, and in preparing this talk, I learned a little bit about AR, and I must say I had quite a lot of fun. So I asked AR to put a picture of somebody that had kept me awake at night over the last while, and you might recognize the ex-Minister of Finance. Sorry, ex-Minister of Agriculture. So veterinary costs, here's another one. We have the collapse of Onderstepoort, 500 million spent there a couple of years back. They can't even produce vaccine to stop FMD. And as I said earlier, FMD should have been avoided. There was no need for us to incur the costs that we had. Contagious abortion, if anybody's experienced that, we have on one of our farms. The government system has fallen apart completely. You're entirely on your own. And then, of course, the loss of export opportunities. And Peter, you guys have obviously been hurt a lot harder than we have as far as that's concerned. I heard yesterday in a meeting that there's 1.6 billion rand that's been allocated to these departments. So let's hope that that money gets used better than the last 500. So just to change it a little bit, as in the introduction, you'll have heard that I'm a dairy farmer. And this is a slide that was brought up at our study group meeting a couple of while ago, which was done by our economist, Neil Curry. And what we asked him to do was to relate the liters of milk to the purchase of a unit. So if you look there, you'll see along the tractor line, in 2011, we had to sell 2,193 liters to buy 1 kilowatt equivalent of tractor. And in 2026, we sold 1,521. So we all thinking tractors have got expensive, but relatively speaking to the milk price, and we have enjoyed fairly constant good milk prices, we're actually better off from a tractor perspective. The diesel, not a huge amount, also slightly better off. The column on the right, you'll see it says 2026 DT. DT is Donald Trump, who you've no doubt all heard of. And we complain about government, but he's playing a bit of havoc in our economy at this stage as well. So there's the Donald Trump factor on the extreme right. But what's interesting here, and on the electricity, that costs inverted. So for 1 liter in 2011, we could buy 5.7 kilowatts of power. We're now at 2.6. So electricity is really costing us a lot of money, and obviously in the dairy industry and irrigating become a major cost. Interesting, in the bottom line, minimum wage, 23 in 2011 and now 37. So our salaries or our wage bill is starting to increase. And if you have the misfortune of farming in Cookhouse and you buy your power from the municipality whose transformer was lying upside down earlier on, your electricity is that much more expensive. So if you've got Eskom, you're better off than we are with the municipal power. Right, then I'd like to touch a little bit about organized agriculture and share some of my views and some of the experiences. You'll all recognize those. It's not all of them, but it's some. Those are all the organizations who speak for farmers. FMD challenged more than us farmers. It challenged the systems, structures, and organizations that exist to support agriculture. So my question to all is this: what should or could organized agriculture have done differently? How do we deal with a future crisis? Because we know it's agriculture, it could well happen. We see it from time to time. And then, are the current structures serving their purpose? That's a question. Smart guys are all in the room. You can each answer those questions yourselves. When established organizations fail to challenge government, they create the space for new organizations to emerge. Farmers will always support those that give them the voice, and their funding will follow. So I'm sure you've probably all heard of the tent theory, where you have a tent and a lot of people maintain it's better to be inside the tent peeing out than being outside the tent peeing in. Now, that's all very well, but we can't have everybody inside the tent. We have to have some people outside the tent. Because what happens often, and we've seen it now recently in agriculture with this FMD situation, the people that seem to have got the traction were the people that were sitting outside the tent. And I'm not saying for a minute the people sitting inside the tent, which was the ICC, the members that the Minister of Agriculture had invited to be part of. I'm not saying for a minute they didn't do their jobs. But always remember that when you're inside that tent, you're going to go with the slowest part of that tent. And in that tent is government. So they're going to be the ones that are going to slow the process down, because you're going to have a meeting this month, you're going to talk, and next month you're going to talk again. The guys outside the tent are the guys that are making the noise and are starting to get the traction. And I was invited to be part of a group called FMD Response. Within no time, we were able to raise R1 million, and we were able to start a media campaign which was very well run by a guy by the name of Andrew Morphy, a guy in KZN. We got a lot of traction. And I think what's important in agriculture is we need people like Johan and Johan's nature, because Johan, I'm glad you're there in that tent and not me, because those guys need to talk to government. And we need to have a good relationship with government. The unfortunate part is that the moment there's any litigation in this country, it's deemed to be personal. And litigation, I don't believe, should be personal, because a minister's job is to see what the law is and to apply the law. That's his job. He doesn't make the rules. If he doesn't apply the job and you disagree, well, then you must litigate. But you're not challenging the minister. You're challenging his interpretation of the law. So I think there needs to be a bit of a mind shift when it comes to litigation. You're litigating the law. You're not litigating against the person on a personal capacity. And I think there maybe needs to be a thought there too. Maybe Agri-SA sometimes need to litigate with government. But it mustn't be offensive. It mustn't be personal. It must be challenging the system to make it better. I can only speak for the milk producer organization. I can't really speak for any of the others. I am also a beef farmer. This is an organization that works, well supported by its milk producers. 880 producers, of which 85% members are paying voluntary levies, which collect about 12 million rand. I don't know how many other organizations there are out there that I listed earlier that have the ability to collect 12 million rand from voluntary. This is not statutory. Serves its purpose, and it took full control of the FMD vaccination program, and together with sponsored vehicles, saw the delivery of vaccines. It did a great job. MPO knows exactly how many animals in every herd and every province. Now, granted, it's a lot easier in the dairy industry because it's a lot more organized, but I think there's a lot that other organizations can learn from the MPO, and I think they were a great example to all. Right, I'm done with the stuff that keeps me awake at night. I'm now going to get onto the stuff that makes me get up in the morning. Transformation through a student program. When we started our expansion with joining number 2 piggeries in about 2004, 2006, we soon realized that the biggest challenge that we had was finding suitable people to manage our farms. We had one of two options. You go and steal your neighbor's manager, and you pay a little bit more than the neighbor's paying. That doesn't work. So we decided, and fortunately our son had come back, who's a lot cleverer than his father, came back to the farm about 10 years ago, and then our daughter came back about 4 or 5 years ago, and she's in HR. So we set about starting a student program, and the decision was that we wanted to grow our own talent. And this is what we've done. And I call it the pride of Just Milk. Every successful business eventually discovers that growth is limited not by opportunity, but by leadership. That's why we're making growing people one of our core strategies. The best farm with the best herd in the best area does not deliver the best result. People do. So our philosophy in Just Milk, we recruit values and we develop skills. We look for character, attitude, a willingness to learn, an ability to work as a team. And this is what we teach. We teach what we have now termed HIT values. And I won't go into too much detail there, but basically the H stands for honesty, the I stands for integrity, T stands for trust, and the other T stands for teamwork. Now, if you don't have that in an organization, it won't work. Well, I certainly don't think it'll work. So this is how it works. We have what we call the student development pipeline. Right at the outset, we have applications. Our applications opened now on the 1st of August. There are already hundreds of applications. I think last year we had a couple of thousand. Our HR department go through all those applications. Obviously, there are a lot of chances in amongst the mix, but they sort it all out. And then we end up with about 16 students in the dairy operation and about the same in the pig business. We also put students into our cheese factory. So we select about 30, 35 students every year that go into the system. We then assign a mentor to those students, and normally the mentor is a student from a year or two back, so they know what's expected of them. Those students then spend a year with us. They milk cows, they do all the basic stuff, and we put them through a training course. But the secret is that we give them the support. We have a full-on HR department, as I said, headed up by my daughter, who manages those students through that first year. And that's important, otherwise they tend to get lost in a big dairy environment. Once those students have completed their first year, we then evaluate them, and I must say that the dropout of students is quite good, because we get some students that arrive there with long nails and long hair, and the first morning they go to milking, they get poo all over them, and it's not such a pretty place to be. And we've had one student that made one milking or half a milking and left us, but that's the kind of thing that happens. But they sort themselves out pretty well. So we end up probably with about 80% of those students would then get through the first year. From those students, we would do evaluations on an ongoing basis, and we will then select from them. So we probably end up with about 33% of those students become what we call graduates, and then they move to a second year. That student won't stay on the same farm. They will move to another farm in the group. They then become graduate managers. They spend a year with us, and then they're in the so-called open market. They can apply to us. If we have a position going up in a senior management, they can apply to take up that option. And we have a very strict ruling in the company that we don't get offended by people leaving us Doesn't matter what level of management you're in, because we feel that if you have been with us in Just Milk for a year or two, we've given you something which you wouldn't have got had you not come to us. So we're very open about that, because you all know that you get a bit upset when you've spent 2 or 3 years training somebody and your guy down the road just pays him an extra $5,000 and he jumps the fence. But those are not the ones we want in any case. So he's actually done you a favor. So this is how we do it. We reckon we're growing leaders, and our greatest investment is, as we see it, in our people. So this is an organogram of the business. Don't worry about the names. What it is there is the farms. Every block is a person. The farms are listed over there. But what I want to point out to you here is if you look at the green blocks are managers of color. The blue blocks are white managers. Now, 99.9% of the students that start at the beginning of the pipeline are black students. In fact, we choose not to get white students because the white students generally are spoilt and they won't accept minimum wage and they want privileges which the black students don't worry about. And then the other thing that's of interest here, if you look, you'll see some of those blocks are circled by purple. Those are the women that are in the system. So we've got white women managing dairies, and we've got black women managing dairies. One of those dairies you'll see on the left-hand side there is 2 women in the 2 senior management positions. Last year, that was the dairy that won the prize for the best performing dairy in the Just Milk Group. So they're quite bossy, these girls. They like, those 2 in particular, work very well together. But at some stage, we probably have to separate them. But that said, I'm very proud of that. And that hasn't just happened overnight. And it's something that I would really encourage you guys to have a look at, because there's no doubt about it that we need to create these opportunities for the younger people. And it's very encouraging for someone like me to stand here and look across the audience and see so many young people. And in the districts that I farm in, it's incredibly encouraging to see how many young guys have now decided that agriculture is not so bad. My son, being a CA, was never going to farm. He phoned me one day and he said to me, "Dad, I'm going to come farming with you." And I nearly fell off my seat. I said, "Well, why do you want to do that?" He said, "No, I didn't realize it's a business." Anyway, so what I wanted to share with you guys now is maybe some alternatives to owning land, some of the experiences that we've had and a bit of the journey. Just for interest sake, that's the dairy that we fired up on Tuesday last week. All right, so growing without owning. Success is not measured by the number of hectares you own, but rather the value that you create. Owning land has always been a farmer's dream. High costs of land and infrastructure and the relative low cash returns has become a barrier to entry for agriculture. Now, we all know that. We all know that your return on capital is not great in agriculture. And I also serve on a board in number 2 Piggeries, where we have an independent director out of the corporate world. And so often when we talk finance, he looks at this and said, "What are you oaks doing here?" Anyway, what they don't understand is there's a lot more to agriculture than the money that's made. But the returns are pretty tight. And the problem now with our returns is, as I mentioned earlier, they're starting to be eroded. And in our situation, we reckon around about 3 to 4% of our return on investment is now being eaten up by costs that we shouldn't have to incur, that I referred to earlier on. So land ownership is not a necessity, as there are other options. Share farming, which is what we're very involved in, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about that. Leasing farms, we lease quite a few farms, common amongst farmers, as you all know. Partnerships and joint ventures, sharing assets and or resources. If you can't share land, there are various ways of doing it. There have been farms in our area where 3 or 4 guys have put their lot together and formed some pretty successful relationships. And then the other one is using contractors. I'm not a machinery person. I get terrified when I look at a tractor, and if it breaks, I have no idea how to fix it. But if a cow gets sick, she's got a good chance that she'll survive, because I know a little bit more about cows than I do about tractors. So we use a lot of contractors because we don't like that cost and we don't like that activity that goes on. And then the other question to the younger guys here is, does every farmer have to own every machine? And that's what we see a lot of in our area. Every guy's got balers and rakes and whatever, and they're right next to each other. And most of the time, those machines are in the garage or in the shed. So I'll share with you what's worked for us. In that picture, some of you might recognize David Miles, David Osborne, the short guy with the multicolored shirt, and Philip van Memety. So those are the 3 guys that we partnered with in 2004. In 2004, we started share milking with number 2 piggeries. I had a consultant who most of you would probably know by the name of Jeff Every. Jeff helped me a lot in my farming career, and he came to a consultation once when I was farming down in Alex on the sea, beautiful farm, looking over the sea, and very comfortable in what I was doing. And he said to me, "You're getting lazy now." So I said, "Yeah." So he said, "It's time that you moved on." Anyway, I said, "Right, well, find me an opportunity, and we'll go and have a look and see what it's all about." He introduced me to David Osborne, who at the time had bought a farm in Cookhouse by the name of Riverside. And being a pig farmer, there was a whole lot of irrigation, and Jeff said to them, "There's no sense in growing maize here, you know nothing about it, we must milk cows." So Dave Osborne said, "Well, we know nothing about milking cows," so Jeff said, "I know somebody that does." That's how Dave Osborne and I got together. I went back home, and I announced to my wife that we were going to move to Cookhouse. Now, if you lived where I've lived, and then you expect your wife to go to Cookhouse, you got a fight coming. Anyway, she was very kind to tag along, and so the venture began. First farm, Riverside, where number 2 piggeries had built a piggery, a fattening unit. We developed the symbiotic relationship, which I'll show you just now in a picture, between dairy, pigs, and the cheese factory. N2P, number 2 piggeries, owned the land. We contributed 50% of the cows, and we were responsible for the management of the farm. So we weren't paid a salary. We were invested in the business with our cows, and obviously we shared in the profit. From a partnership perspective, our second dairy, which was next door, we bought in a 50-50 between ourselves and number 2 piggeries, and Dave Osborne was very good to me that I didn't have to go to my banks to loan money. He funded the operation for us. Then we bought into the cheese factory in Cookhouse. A company called Dairy Bell went insolvent. We were the sole suppliers at one stage and lost a lot of money and had to find new milk buyers in a hurry, but we were able to buy the factory back and have subsequently got it up and running. So the 3 Cookhouse farms, that milk all goes to the factory. That factory is in the company where we own a 50-50 share, and it's managed by my son. Subsequent farms that have been bought in one of the 2 entities, either in the 50-50 where we have the equity share, or number 2 piggeries have bought. If we can't afford to be in the partnership, then They would buy the land, and that farm would then be share farmed by ourselves. On the share farming units, we paid 25% share of the profits. All cows are owned 50-50 across the board, whether it's an equity farm or whether it's a share farm. The cows are 50-50, so we are able to move cows between entities without affecting shareholding in any way. And then the equipment is bought by the landowners, but maintained by the operating entity. So this is what makes the cookhouse quite interesting. You can see there at the top of the pile, Just Milk. Those are the 3 dairy farms. They about 5 or 6 kilometers joining Pieter, 5 or 6 kilometers from cookhouse. The milk goes to the cookhouse creamery where we make whey, and you all know the byproduct of making cheese is whey. The whey is then pumped back through a pipeline back to the piggery, and every now and again it bursts on Pieter's farm because we cross his farm, and neighborly relationships. Pieter's very patient. Anyway, the cookhouse creamery then pump the whey back to the pigs. The fattening units, there are 2 of them on the farm, and we feed the whey to the pigs. It's mixed with the meal, which is a wet feed system. So obviously in pigs, you either dry feed or you wet feed. So these cows get a meal that's mixed with a whey and a mash, and obviously it adds a huge amount of value because we can't get all the protein out of that cheese in the factory. So there's a lot of protein that goes through the system. In Elliot, on that cheese factory, we got the cheese factory and the dairy there before the piggery came. So currently we're starting to feed that way to our dairy cows. So we're milking them out the one end, and we're pushing the whey back in the other end. So that's going to be an interesting venture, that. But the guys that have done it say it works pretty well. So what makes it work? I guess trust between the partners. There's been an incredible relationship that we've built over time. When we started it, a good friend of mine said, "You and Dave Osborne will not last very long because you're both far too difficult." But 24 years later, it's worked very well. And it's worked simply because there's mutual trust. We have a shared common vision to build a successful dairy business. The synergies between dairy, pigs, and the cheese factory has obviously been very good for both the pastures, that we pump the pig manure onto the pastures, and on those farms our nitrogen bill is next to nothing because of the pig manure. The one challenge we do have are the K levels, which get a little bit high, but we obviously rotate maize silage through the system. And then economies of scale in our purchasing power of commodities like maize, veterinary products, and that type of thing. Obviously being part of number 2 piggeries that buy an enormous amount of maize, as you can imagine, to feed all those pigs. We always, excuse the pun, we piggyback with them, and they do all the buying for us, and we obviously share in that supply of maize. And it's amazing the savings that you can make. Now, typically in our system, on our dairy farms, we bought up about 8 months now ahead for maize because we saw it as an opportunity, and I think it's going to work in our favor. Very strict controls and discipline within the company. Sometimes people seem to think, work with us, we're a little bit unreasonable. Maybe we are, but very, very strict controls. And I have a wife who's a control freak, and a lot of the controls that we have in place are there because of her work, and also because of situations that we've had where people have taken advantage of the system, stolen from us, found out, and obviously had to try and block that. You never block them all, but you do try to get most of them. But we have very strict reporting systems in our group, and we have very strict controls. Our goal has always been to be in the top 10% in our area. When I started out with this venture with number 2 piggeries, again, I was leaning on Jeff, our consultant, and I said to Jeff, as a dairy farmer, what do I have to do to be successful? And he said to me, make sure you're always in the top 10%. So to all you young guys out there, if that's one thing you take home now, is always make sure that you're in the top 10%, because if you are, then 90% is going to drop out before you do. So I think it was great advice from Jeff's part. And this is just something I had to add because someone mentioned this the other day, and dreams work if you do. So in conclusion, this evening there's a presentation of the Young Farmers Award, which I think is a great idea from East Cape Agri, and I wish those guys very well, and also to all the young farmers that are here. And I speak to the young farmers in particular for the reason that you'll see in my conclusion. So I said, I want a young picture of a young farmer. I want 2 roads, one that leads over a krantz and one that leads to prosperity. And that's what they gave me. So that young guy has got one of 2 options. Take the one that he gets involved, leads to prosperity, or wait for others. Now what concerned me about AI, and I don't know why, but it worried me that there were quite a lot of oaks sitting at the end of that cliff waiting to jump. But anyway, that said, we often say we produce milk, beef, maize, or wool. But perhaps the greatest crop we produce is the next generation of farmers. Every generation has had its challenge. Our parents battled droughts, high interest rates, political change. Our challenge is to ensure that agriculture continues to have a voice in the decisions that shape our future. If good people choose not to serve, others will. And if organized agriculture does not speak for farmers, someone else will, and they may not have the farmer's interest at heart. Agricultural organizations are only as strong as the people who belong to them. They don't exist for someone else. They exist for us. To the young farmers in the room, this is your future. Don't wait until a crisis arrives before becoming involved. Join, participate, challenge, lead, and help build the agriculture that you want to inherit. And finally, our farms are businesses, but they are also a legacy. Let us leave the next generation more than productive land. Let us leave them a unified, respected, and influential agricultural community. Thank you very much.